It's an incredible honor and pleasure to have with us Phil Nelson to conclude this special fifth anniversary edition of Living Histories. Phil, would you please tell us about Living Many Histories?
Well, thank you very much, Sri. And I want to start, though, by saying how much I admire you for creating this way of bringing people together in the thick of the pandemic and then lasting ever since. It's a tremendous thing. I don't know of any other field of science where there's something like it, so thank you. Yeah, my understanding is that a living history talk should answer the question, where did you come from? And it's kind of an interesting topic because, as I'll tell you in a minute, in a certain sense, I didn't know where I came from until fairly recently. Of course, you can just ask the omniscient cloud, right? So I asked the omniscient cloud, and hello, it gave me all these well-known people and their students, pretty well-known people. And then there were some also pretty well-known people, and then there I am. So problem solved, right? But that's kind of a superficial answer. It didn't really satisfy me. I never even met any of the people at the top of the list. And on the other hand, there are a lot of people completely missing who had crucial effects on me, just didn't happen to be my official advisors. It's true that I was personally influenced by Mr. Robert Zacher and his joyful passion for physics a long time ago. And then, like Keith, I had a formative period at the DAMTP. That was important too, but I need to go back further. You see, unlike Stefan, no relative of anywhere in my whole family has ever had any interest in math or physics. Okay, let me set that aside for a minute and switch gears a little bit. I'd like you to meet my grandmother, Grace. And I'm sorry to say I never knew her because she was dead just a few years after this photo was taken. She died from an infection that nobody ever dies from in the developed world any longer. She left behind a 2-year-old child, later became my mother. Why am I telling you this sad personal story? Well, it's sad, all right, but it's not the least bit personal. Okay, throughout most of human history, stories like this were perfectly normal. Anyone my age can go back 2 generations and hear stories like that in their family. I'm telling you this story because Grace wants to tell us something. What Grace wants to tell us is that fundamental research is important, and that's what we have to keep telling other people. Unlike those sulfa drugs that were far inferior, penicillin was discovered by chance in the course of fundamental research. Unfortunately, it wasn't in widespread use in the United States in the Midwest in the 1920s, but shortly after, it saved a lot of lives, didn't it? There are many, many other equally important life-saving medical treatments that we got that came out of fundamental research. Grace is telling us, never miss any opportunity to tell anyone who will listen, and even more importantly, those who are not yet ready to listen, some concrete, specific stories on this topic. And penicillin's a good one, but that was a long time ago. We got to remember to keep looking for the recent stories too. Even people who say, yeah, research, it's important, they don't always remember how important. And I guess it's not self-evident. It's not self-evident to a lot of people in the United States today, but some people in the audience right now are alive today because of images like this one. So let me just tell you a little bit about this image, okay? Structure determination, it's important throughout all of molecular biology. Yes, of course, this one had a global impact. What you're seeing on the left is conformations of spike protein from a virus. And well, you can see highlighted that there are 2 different conformations, aren't there? It's the same protein, just has 2 different conformations. Okay? That was important. If you just inject this protein in the blood, then you're going to get the true conformation that it would have had in the intact virus, and the bogus conformation that is just confusing the immune system. And then you'll train up your immune system in some confused way, and it won't be a very good vaccine. People couldn't even grasp the issue until they had the images. And the images led them to genetically engineer a modified spike protein that stabilized the native conformation and gave a good vaccine. Now, there are two things that are really, really important and puzzling about these images. One is everybody knows it takes years to crystallize a new protein, but these images were available within weeks after the publication of the genome of COVID. Okay, well, it's not X-ray crystallography. It's cryo electron microscopy, technique invented by people who had no idea that any pandemic was coming. It was fundamental research. Okay. Um, X-ray crystallography also doesn't do very well when there are multiple conformations. You either just suppress the minority conformation and don't see it at all, or you just see a blur where the two conformations disagree with each other. You got to have single particle cryo-electron microscopy to even grasp what was going on and make an effective vaccine. So that's an important piece of the story. But also, if you think about it some more, you may ask, why on earth was anybody doing this in 2017? There was no COVID in 2017. What is this? This is SARS-CoV-1. It was not causing millions of deaths. People doing fundamental research said, we got to learn everything we can about this virus. Okay? They learned an important lesson that went over immediately to SARS-CoV-2, saved tens of millions of lives. Okay, that's one reason why fundamental research is important. And we just got to keep telling people every chance we get. Now, I'm not going to read out this slide, but I just want to point out that if you're interested in that story, you can learn about that and many other things in this fantastic page-turner book by Tom Chech called The Catalyst. I really recommend this. I learned a lot of stuff from that book. Yeah. What do grumpy old professors say? They say, students, they don't seem to have any scientific curiosity these days. They just want to know the facts so they can regurgitate them on command. But crime fiction writers seem to know something useful about reader engagement. So maybe there's an opportunity here. Maybe I could communicate my love for our subject better like Robert Zacher did for me long ago. I didn't think it through in those terms back in the year 2000, but I just had some feeling when I was writing that book. And if you compulsively need to tell a story, like some byproduct of your desperate need to get it straight in your own head, then the cost may be great, but it can be very satisfying when you find you're actually able to teach total strangers things that some of them actually want and need to be taught. Okay, so I've told you who I came from, but not where I came from. And for a long time, I wasn't sure because, unlike Stefan, nobody in my family ever had much interest in science and math. Because Grace died so young, we don't have a lot of pictures of her. So every picture has been scrutinized in great detail. But still, I was in my 60s before it even occurred to me to wonder, what is that book? Yeah, she probably read Shakespeare. She probably read Hawthorne, whatever you read in the 1920s. But what book was so important that she wanted to be photographed touching the book? But then the trail went cold. It was illegible. What are you going to do? You can't go ask her. So another few years went by before it even occurred to me, what would anybody in the 1920s say to me? They would say, have you tried a magnifying glass, stupid? Black and white photos, they're eternal. They have non-organic pigments. So I tried a magnifying glass. And I found the answer. Then I asked my mother, who was in her 90s, and she said, oh yeah, I heard she taught math. Okay. Took me like 5 minutes to download the full text of that book. Now I have a direct intellectual pipeline to Grace and her mental world. So that's where I came from. And now I know that she also loved books as well. So thank you, Grace, and thank you all for your attention.
Wow. Thank you so much, Phil, for a wonderfully inspiring and thought-provoking living histories talk. Even as I'm processing your talk, let me get started with the first question, which is you talked about this compulsive need that some of us have to tell a story, even as a way to sort things out in our own heads. Um, did I get that right?
Yeah, everything I write is garbage for the first 15 drafts, and it takes a long time to get it out of my head in a way that any other person can possibly understand. So, yeah.
Uh, you preempted my question, Phil. I was
Oh, I'm
going to
sorry.
ask you, how do you write a paper? And I think you partly answered it by talking about the need to go over several iterations. Would you
Yeah.
unpack that a little bit more in the context of scientific writing? Do
Well,
you?
I'd say that 90% of writing is rewriting. And for me, I have to run it by a class over and over again and figure out what did they miss that I thought was so clear. Oh, it wasn't clear at all. And what was inconsistent. And what sounded inconsistent, even though secretly it wasn't inconsistent, but still sounded paradoxical. And, there are all sorts of, I'm just not smart enough to get things right on the first try. And so that's where the struggle comes in. Um, by the
Thank
way,
you.
by the
Go
way,
ahead.
Sri, if I could just respond to a question you asked from Stefan
Okay.
about mentors.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say it's really important to pay it forward with mentors. It's really important to be the mentor for other people that you wished you'd had, or that you really did have back then. There are a lot of people who were extremely generous with their time and just not their just time, but their intellectual energy with me. And you get to be that person for someone else, and not just your official PhD students or students enrolled in your class, but people who come by. Uh, it's so easy to feel really busy. A lot of good stuff can come out of those conversations with other people. So there, go ahead. And you had another question, I think.
Thank you, Phil. Inspiring words. I wanted to ask you about your love for teaching, which I have personally experienced. Would you please share a few words on that?
Um, it doesn't always feel great in the moment, uh, but I think there's lecturing, and lecturing is kind of a distant thing, and it has its virtues. You can certainly tell a organized story if you prepare it in advance like that. But to me, what makes me get out of bed in the morning is the prospect of an office hour where people will come throwing stuff at me that is almost but not quite within my grasp. And sometimes I'll get it right, and sometimes I won't get it right. That's where the energy comes from, I think, for me. So yeah, it's important to make lectures that make sense, but to me, what makes it come home is in an office hour when you see the light bulb go off in some other person's head right there in real time.
Thank you so much, Phil. In the interest of time, I'm going to close the recording in just a moment. But if you want to close with some wise words, would you please share?
Well, something that didn't occur to me until kind of recently is don't be embarrassed to say idealistic things once in a while to young people. They won't really blow you off. They may seem to be so world weary, but things like that will sink in if you don't overdo it. And people have repeated to me things that I said decades ago that I might have been too embarrassed to say. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, Phil. On that very high note, I am closing the recording.